Well, good morning to all of you and welcome to this panel discussion. I'm Faye D'Souza. It's a pleasure to have this conversation bright and early. As you can see, I have my morning jacket on and not my evening news jacket. I'm very excited to have a conversation with all of the people on this panel. Never before in our country has there been such a crying need for formal training in the subject of policy and a subject specifically of public policy. As we speak today, Bharat is band because of a policy-led problem. We have 3 lakh farmers protesting outside of Delhi for over a policy they believe was passed without consultation. Now, obviously, I'm going to resist the urge to argue the merits and the demerits of that policy, but it's safe to say that it is an issue with policy. And it's the issue with how the policy, our communication around that policy and how the policy was passed. But if we actually step back and look at the country now with a slightly wider lens, there are issues of federalism, problems between state and center, taxation. Most of the policy decisions being made by states and by center winds up in the court of the judiciary that sort of turned referee to our policy making, blurring the lines between executive and, between legislature and judiciary. Communication is particularly a problem. Between government and opposition, between government and states, between government and citizen. And specifically coming out of COVID, our challenges, which we've had for 70 years as a country, and even before that, our challenges of poverty, malnourishment, education, healthcare, inequality have become far more pronounced by this one pandemic year. And perhaps in some cases, numbers suggest that it has set us back from our achievements of the last 2 decades, and which means that it's going to be a much longer climb of pushing this boulder uphill than we had expected 2020, 2021 to be. There's also the issue of unemployment and recovery of our economy. The topic I've been given for this session is, and I quote, policy, politics, and purpose, India's biggest policy challenges in the next 10 years and what can be done to solve them. It seems like an excellent 2 hours work to come up with solutions for the next 10 years. So I'm glad we've put together an amazing group of people because this is no small feat. This is, like I started off saying, this is the launch conversation for the Kautilya School of Public Policy in Hyderabad. There is a brochure that has come out. It's very interesting. It's you must take a look at it. I remember when I had visited the Kennedy School of Public Policy at Harvard, and I thought about why India doesn't have something like this, why India doesn't have a school that teaches people who want to be involved in policy, want to be involved in government, how to really do that job well, because it is a complicated, difficult job. The school is now here. And it's a brilliant thing that the school is here, but I want to introduce the members of my panel to you who are also board members, some of the board members in the school. Of course, if you want to look at the entire list of board members, it's in the prospectus and it's also on the website. You can check that out. But for now, joining me on this panel right now, Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha. Good morning. Ms. Chaturvedi is an Indian politician. She's in Rajya Sabha from Maharashtra. She's the deputy leader of the Shiv Sena. She's also a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce and Industries and a consultative committee on external affairs. It's an honor to have this conversation with her. Mr. Rathin is the Managing Director of Research and Policy at the Oxford Development Institute. He was formerly Director and CEO of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy and former Director of IPCIG and UNDP Brazil. He was also on invitation of Government of India, served as economic advisor to the 13th Finance Commission, a constitutional body of the Government of India. My next panelist, it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with him. Mr. Navjeet Singh Sarna is the former Indian ambassador to the US. He served as India's High Commission to the UK as well, ambassador to the State of Israel, and secretary to the Ministry of External Affairs. He has the distinction of being India's longest serving Foreign Office spokesperson. And it's going to be interesting to have conversations with him about communication and how important that is for government and for people who are training to be in government. He held that post for 6 years. He served in various diplomatic posts in Moscow, Poland, Bhutan, Iran, Washington, and Geneva. Mr. Dilip Cherian, who is sporting a very cool beard. But I must say he's been sporting this beard long before beards became cool. So consistent branding there, Mr. Cherian. Mr. Cherian is India's image guru. He's a political campaign advisor and a policy professional. He's actively been a guide in political and policy advocacy, and he understands India's bureaucratic system, which would make him a team of one of people who understand India's bureaucratic system, because it's a really difficult system to understand. These are our board members and members of our panel. Welcome to all of you. Let me also bring in the founders who join us as well. Mr. M. Shri Bharat. Mr. Bharat is the president of GITAM, the deemed university. He's a graduate of Purdue University and Stanford University. He believes very strongly that there is a need to reinvent public policy in India and empower the next generation of policy leaders. Mr. Prateek Kanwal is a co-founder at the Kautilya School of Public Policy. He has a master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. He was also awarded the World Bank Scholarship for his work in the areas of education reform and social innovation. Also joining us, Mr. Sridhar Pabbisetty, founding director of the Kautilya School of Public Policy. He's been working in public policy and governance for the last decade. In fact, he and I have actually worked on many citizen issues, with the city of Bangalore and outside of it, sort of making ourselves, a nuisance to the governments of the day, but we got a lot of work done. And we're very proud of that. He served before this as COO at the Center of Public Policy at IIM Bangalore and CEO of the Namma Bangalore Foundation. I welcome all of you to this conversation. I hope you've had a good morning so far, and I hope we can keep it good. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to start with Ms. Chaturvedi as our Indian politician on the panel. I listed out a various list of issues that we're facing right now, Ms. Chaturvedi, but specifically, obviously, the biggest one is COVID, is the lockdown, and the fallout of all of that, along with the farmers, of course. If I were to just take the theme of this conversation to you, as in India's biggest policy challenges for the next 10 years, and even if you want to look at it from a slightly shorter view and say the next 2 years or the 3 years, in your opinion, what are our biggest challenges right now?
I think the biggest challenge would be the intellectual bandwidth of the government of the day. In terms of the depth of policy making, those are our massive challenges. And I think it would be good for the government if it realizes that these are the weak points of the government, for it to be, while it enjoys popular support, in terms of bringing policies into motion and into action, is something which is, I would say, there is a certain lack of understanding of how things work and how policies are shaped. Policies, for example, the farmer agitation is what you began with. Everybody knows that we need big bang reforms. Everybody also understands that farmers need to have a better income. They need to also get past the hurdles of various, people who have been exploiting them, about their land rights, etc. We all know that. Every economist will also tell you that India needs that. How do you go about setting it is something that the government needs to understand. It cannot be a top-down policy, and agriculture is a state subject where they could have taken in, a consensus opinion before shaping up with a policy. And now that they haven't done that, they haven't even discussed it, arrived at a consensus, you're seeing the amount of agitation that is happening. So these are things which I think the short term and the long run repercussions of something like this is something for the government of the day to realize. And that is why we need better intellectuals out there. We need better people who understand policy making. They understand state subject versus the, coming from the center. So those are concurrent issues that we need to discuss about and debate about. And with Kautilya, I believe the idea was just that we have a better understanding of policies and how it shapes political narratives as well, because that is what it boils down to for every political party.
That's very well said. And I just want to bring in the other panelists to just weigh in on what you've said. Mr. Rathin, obviously, communication is a challenge, and we'll come to communication as a specific challenge, but the understanding of how laws should be processed in terms of consultation with opposition, with citizens, with experts. Is there a failing there that we can sort of bridge with the training of professionals?
Thank you, Faye. I'd like to I was going to talk about India's challenges. I think
Yes.
Ms. Chaturvedi has very rightly pointed out what the challenges in even coming together to meet these challenges are. So let me say I think of it as a triangle. And in that triangle, there are three principal challenges. One is what I call and these are all societal challenges. I'd go beyond the state. I've seen Congress governments, I've seen BJP governments, I've seen NDA governments, and I think in some measure or the other, I've seen the Telugu Desam government, since I'm talking to Hyderabad, and in some measure or the other, I've seen the communist governments. This triangle seems to haunt us every time.
Yes.
First element in that triangle is what I think is something that parents in this country inculcate in their children, which is that policy making is a technocratic business. It is not. It cannot be. And for it not to be technocratic, therefore, you have to understand the art and science of policy formulation within a context of a collective. It could be a local collective, a national collective, a global collective, in which winning elections is only one part. It is perfectly possible to have highly populist, highly popular, extremely incompetent, retrogressive governments. And I'm not just talking about, maybe I'm not even talking about the present regime. Maybe I'm talking about a cheap shot, the CPM in West Bengal. Maybe I'm talking about Mrs. Gandhi in the early 70s. And then you can draw parallels to the present day. So to understand things like, let me give you an example. I was driving today into my office and I had to pass central Delhi, which is where all the important politicians live. And I looked outside my window and said, what a weak state. They are so afraid. Why did I say that? They all live in concentric circles of security. And there were 15 police barricades because a bunch of farmers outside this city, 30 kilometers away, were protesting. What kind of courage is that? That's for me a sign of a weak state, a state that turns in security walls into itself. And I think this is the first misapprehension about public policy. Our state and our state apparatus is very weak. Our politicians are unable to manage the executive well. And where there is ideological commitment, you get action, but that ideological commitment has never been consistently either about prosperity or about the collective coming together for better social outcomes, such as caste and things like that. So you see, this is, I think, a very important operational point. And very often the reason why people can't communicate is because they think something is technocratic. In India, I put it to you, we have educated people, we do not have educated people anymore. We have people who have credentials, who get jobs. To move from that to having educated people, I think is a principal skill that you will learn or ought to learn, and I'm confident will learn in the public policy schools. That's one end of the triangle. The second is an obsession with the future tense. This is the only country where whether we're talking about our neighbors or we're talking about China or we're talking about the economy or we're talking about social problems, we're always talking about tomorrow or day after tomorrow. India lives in the future continuous tense, and that is nice for a young country with aspiration as long as things that you dream of in the future continuous tense are happening in the present tense. My lifetime to you, I'm 52 years old, is a testimony, ladies and gentlemen, that the future continuous tense has not happened. When someone asked me many years ago why I thought Narega was a good idea, despite the fact that I had written critically saying that why is the Congress government in a period of high growth providing unemployment insurance? Why aren't jobs coming? And I said, because it's the only thing that's worked in my lifetime since Nehru set up the IITs. Nothing else has worked. Everything has failed from IRDP to IADP to this to that. And you see that in our foreign policy as well. So and this leads to the third end of our triangle, which is new, which I think is something that, Andy Mukherjee and others have been talking about very eloquently. The end of collective aspiration and a turning in on each other as a substitute for that collective aspiration for two things, prosperity and social harmony. Both have now become zero-sum games. And because they have become zero-sum games, I think the big public policy challenge but the art lies in understanding this turning in. It is not a political party alone that is doing it. It is again profoundly societal. It is how our families fight with each other. It is how our communities treat common resources as zero-sum games. That will make India, if not stopped, into, dare I say, the Philippines, Think about it. We have never been the Philippines before. This country looks to be more and more like a country that has lost aspiration. Sure, you'll have some middle income, things. Sure, you'll get lots of nurses and send them to Dubai. But the country will not be a serious place. Now, if that doesn't attract you to public policy in art and science, then I suggest you go back to engineering school or to learn chartered accountancy, because this is challenging, this is interesting, this is out of the box, this is fun, and it is also the highest form of national service you can provide, because all the technocracy in the world is not going to help you address this country's challenges unless we are able to, take this triangle up by the scruff of its neck and change it for the better. Thank you.
So thank you for that, Mr. A quick follow-up question, and I'll take the same question to the other panelists as well. Do you believe that the design of our system of 5 years of government and then elections in different states causes a sort of myopic view of policy, also causes division based on caste and now based on religion, because that helps electoral politics. It doesn't do any favors, like you said, to actual decision making and policy making. But are those two things working against each other? Is it counterproductive? I believe you're mute.
Not at all, not at all, not at all. I don't think it is the periodicity of elections or even elections themselves that cause it. Let me give you one example. I think it's very sensible for people in India at this stage of the proceedings not to vote for a better economic future, because there's absolutely no evidence that anybody has done that for the last 70 years. Another example, very briefly, when the pandemic happened, I now live in England a lot, and therefore virtually for the moment. And I suddenly realized when I was talking to people there, I said that, don't you have an oximeter? They said, no. So why don't you have an oximeter? I said, well, I must get one, mustn't I? And the reason is that in India, I have oximeters. I had arranged for oxygen for my 88-year-old mother, within 15 years of the pandemic, because I don't trust the government. I don't trust the healthcare system. I don't trust the education system. जैसे मोदी जी पहले कहते थे, हम तो बहुत पहले से ही निकम्मा सरकार से आत्मनिर्भर है, क्योंकि हर सरकार निकम्मा है, बड़े-बड़े बातें करते हैं, छोटे-छोटे काम करते हैं. In that, what you will get is a game which is quite logical. People will work with caste groups and affiliates to get what they know they can get through those strategies, until you offer them an alternative, which is why you will see with the current ruling party, on the socio-economic front, whether it is the temple or the Uniform Civil Code or triple talaq, or dare I say it, even love jihad, there is cross-party, cross-caste support. So if you make a concrete offer, it's like business. You can create support. The trouble is there's been simply no ideology for a long time now, at least on the economic front, that allows this to happen. So we have treated these things as technocratic, and the consequences are that the electorate says, fine, you technocrats do your thing. I'm going to vote for what I logically get with my vote. It's perfectly logical. The timing of elections will not affect it, nor will, much as some people like to think, a presidential form of government.
Right, thank you for that. Moving on to our next panelist, Mr. Navtej Singh. Sarna, I apologize for mispronouncing the name during the introduction. Sir, I want you to communicate also to us about external affairs and diplomacy, and the fact that it has now, in the age of Twitter, become sort of free game for everybody to have an opinion on, very different from what it was maybe 2 decades ago. Do you believe that we have enough talent in that space? We're training enough people as a country in that space, and how critical is it, to enhance our ability to train individuals for diplomacy?
Thank you, Faye. And before I come to your specific question on the diplomatic aspects or the diplomacy aspects of these issues, I think just a general point which I would like to make, having listened to the previous 2 speakers, I think there is in my mind, sort of thinking rather simplistically, I think the fact is that we have evolved as a society. It's an inevitable evolution. The issues that were supposed to be sort of sorted out in North Block, South Block, or the Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Agriculture are today issues of concern to an increasing number of people. Now, this is the impact of education. This is the impact of awareness. Let me not go into the politics of it, because politics is a given. We
Yes.
can't, overnight change anything. That's a given. We have those issues. We have a federal structure. We have a constitution, as good or as imperfect as it may or may not be. But the fact is that these issues have now come down to a public level. And this happens in every major country. I mean, it's there in the US, it's there everywhere else. So this is a given. The fact is that now policy cannot only be kept in the ivory towers, so to speak. So given that simple point, I think the issues have to be understood better, have to be explained better, and there have to be people who are qualified to do this. This, to my mind, is the essential need for public policy intellectuals, if you can call that. Take the example of nuclear power, for instance. I mean, 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, nuclear power was something which was handled by DAE or BARC, and nobody talked about it, nobody knew about it. But today, if you are going to set up a nuclear plant, you're going to have local fishermen protesting about it. You're going to have local villagers talking about it. So again, this is the interface that has developed. What has not developed is that school of people, and I use that word advisedly here, is a school of people who can actually come and advise both the people as well as the government or the people who are making the policy as to the problems that exist. And if we had that, then probably some of the problems that we are having today may not have been there, or may have been lesser and lesser there. And international relations is only a reflection of your domestic concerns, or should be. If your international policy gets so divorced from your domestic concerns that it seeks to matter, then you're going to reach, your rubber band is going to break. So for any sensible foreign policy, you have to be reflecting and answering domestic concerns. So the same things apply exactly to foreign policy. For instance, foreign policy today is not just about defense and security. Yes, that is part of it, but so is trade. But is it just trade? It is trade which then attracts child labor. It is trade which is then impacts your environment policy. So today you have major international issues are health, environment, climate change, migration, refugees. These are transborder by definition. And these are impact people by definition. They are not just for the foreign ministry to handle. And if the foreign ministry does not take into consideration what the domestic concerns are, for instance, we've just voted in favor of delisting cannabis. Now that is a direct impact on the public. And why we have done so, there must have been a reasoning behind it and assessment behind it. Now, can the Ministry of Foreign Affairs simply do this on its own? In my view, it can't. A, we are too small. B, we are too busy. I still talk of we because I was there 2 years ago. And C, we are always in the middle of a crisis. So our officers don't have the time to be doing back papers and looking at huge analysis and understanding and going around doing interviews. What is beginning to happen is the development of some think tanks, which are looking at these issues in a broader way. But I must say that is still in its infancy. And who staffs these think tanks? A lot of our retired diplomats, right? Which is all to the good. But then again, they have their limitations, I'm sorry to say. They are again a product of the same system. So what we really need here is what we are trying to develop, for instance, in the Kautilya School of Public Policy, are people who can come up with well thought out, evidence-based options which can guide your public policy. So when you ask me, can our people be trained? I think they can be, but they will need a lot of assistance from outside. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very well said. Mr. Dilip Cherian is also with us. Mr. Cherian, the bit about conversation and communication, and I just want to draw your attention to the fact that even with the farmer protests right now, 3 lakh farmers, 5 months after these laws were passed, the government's argument is that they haven't understood correctly, which could be translated to we have not communicated correctly, because that's why they haven't understood. And communication from government with various stakeholders is half the job, isn't it? I want you to just weigh in on the fact that we're talking about the challenges that India will face over the next 10 years. How much of a part will communication play in mitigating those challenges?
Thank you, Faye. I think we've covered some of the ground as far as that is concerned, but there are huge parts that need study and that will involve people who choose to go into the Kautilya School of Public Policy and acquire the skills needed for it. The big element that we have not perhaps touched upon explicitly is the fact that the way millennials react to public policy, the way millennials will eventually voice their feelings on politics, public policy, and their sense of identity. It's all about communications. And the facts so far as they reveal themselves is that when millennials feel a sense of alienation, then they wreak huge damage on the so-called monoliths of public policy or institutions. So there is a lack of faith, which is expressed in rioting, arson at one extreme, and just passive indifference or even attempts to get out of the country. So the point being that communications is difficult, it is missing. That is to be taken into account. But what's also to be taken into account is that you're communicating with a new generation of citizens, of voters, of those who will have their say. As those on the panel, from Rathin, who looks at policy, to Navtej, who looks at diplomacy and all the related issues, and Priyanka, who's a politician, the skill that you can see is a skill that you will need to practice and then perfect in the confines of a school. So if you want to be in any order of public policy, learning to communicate is a skill, and communicating is a skill that government needs to make sure that it can cope with the patchwork of interests, which are today much more powerful. Each element of that patchwork is getting more and more powerful. You may say that this is a government, if this government were to do any self-analysis, it would insist that it is the most communicative of all governments, because its ministers use Twitter all the time and very rarely give interviews directly. And certainly we've never had a prime minister who hasn't given anything extempore, as it were, for such a long period of time. On the other hand, take the contrast of someone who was a communicator and who had to deal with much larger problems and who succeeded, like the late Narasimha Rao. And I'm using this as an example because of the fact that Kautilya is also based out of the same state. Here was a man who managed to cope with huge differences both within and outside the government, and yet made massive policy changes using professionals, skilled professionals, to be able to patch together what he needed to achieve. So I think if one looks at the next 10 years, the future belongs to a new cadre of people who have the skills of communications, certainly, and who have the tools which can only come about by a certain patient exposure to the nuts and bolts of policy making. So I would say that at the way things are poised at the moment, policy making has been left, as it were, to a bunch of bureaucrats who are increasingly huddled together only in one office. Very little is heard from the public. Very little effort is made to communicate to more. And that simply is beginning to break down. You're able to sort of keep it together because you're constantly distracting people with either a vaccine or a promised land in the near future or 15 lakhs in their bank accounts. But that is not going to last beyond the point. The fact is that people are increasingly raising their voice, asking questions, and though these may seem like nibbles, it will soon be an all-enveloping gulp. And I think that those of us who have had the advantage of experiencing regime changes know that nothing lasts forever. So there is the likelihood that when you come out of the Kautilya Public School of Policy, you will be geared up to cope with the fact that identity politics has changed the landscape that we knew and we experienced, but change will be the only constant, and you better be geared up for that.
Mr. Cherian, again, quick counter question to you and also to the other panelists who've spoken so far before I bring in the founding members of the school. You said nothing lasts forever and people have begun to raise their voice. The rebut to that would be from government that, hey, we keep winning elections. We won half the votes in Bihar. We won a considerable number of votes in Hyderabad, which no one was expecting. It seems whatever is happening seems to be working. The protests don't seem to be denting any sort of electoral victory, which one point of view could be electoral victory is the only thing that matters, because what else does one need other than numbers to push through policy? What's your response to that? At the end of the day, yes, training in policy means to be winning elections.
Let's take the broad thesis which you are pushing, which is that elections are the only thing that matters. Yes. Even there, please watch and observe that almost no party has, and Rathin said there was very good reason why they should not, had any policy changes to offer. But most importantly, what is winning the elections is actually the ability to communicate hope and to constantly sell, constantly drive the selling of what you need to sell to that public. That brings me to the second issue. The huge kinds of data crunching and information resources that the ruling party currently use helps them to be able to fine-tune their messaging to the audiences that matter to get them the votes each time. So whether it was in Bihar or whether it was in Hyderabad, they were able to pick up the fact, for example, from studies which are publicly available, that the level of intense anger at the ground level on the handling of the Hyderabad floods was something that the ruling party there just insisted on being oblivious to. So you are talking of data crunching. You're talking of being able to massage your message to the audience of that point of time to get to the result that you want, which is winning elections. So yes, winning elections is happening. Massaging messages is happening. Getting the data crunching right is happening. And those skills are not being put into practice by almost anybody else, which is why the winning happens. That's my take.
To our board member panelists who've already spoken, my question to all of you is this: between the IAS, the Foreign Service, basically the bureaucracy and politics, this, or at least from the outside, seems to be jobs that, seems to be work that one learns on the job, because it's a long career. It's a sensitive career job that depends on relationships. It depends on being able to navigate a complicated, very old system. How much of the formal training in a school like the one we're talking about would be, would you think would further someone's ability to be a good politician / bureaucrat? And how much of this is really learning on the job? You take the exam, you join the service, and then you hit the ground running and you learn on the job. Ms. Chaturvedi, I'll start with you. You're a young politician. That couldn't have been a difficult, profession to start with. How much of it was learning on the job, and do you think actual formal training would help?
I don't know if formal training helps you and try to give them a narrative and also work in a direction which satisfies what they are looking for in leadership roles. I just like to say one thing here about bureaucracy, about governance, about citizens. Citizens have evolved. They have now tools of communication. Now everybody thinks they have a voice in governance. That is through the various social media platforms. So you have an evolved citizenry. You have an evolved democracy. We can continue to debate whether it is too much opinion is also good for the democracy or no. That is another point of debate. Even in political parties, you see a sense of evolvement. Many political parties evolve themselves over the years. There are some who refuse to. That's why we see a massive gap in being a strong opposition. But in terms of being evolving aspirations of the people is a must for any political party to continue to survive, revive, and thrive. Third is the steel frame. We continue to talk about the IAS, IFS, which has largely been, I would say, they've become the gatekeepers of all kinds of policy making issues. And it is time when everybody else is evolving, all three verticals of the governments are evolving, governance is evolving, then it is time that even the steel frame was made to evolve. So when we do not have enough bandwidth in terms of bureaucracy, then we need to have a citizenry which is empowered with that knowledge. And I think this is where the public policy schools come into place. One of them is Kautilya. And we kept all of that in mind when we decided to go ahead with the school. So this is what matters. We need to have people, citizenry, which is empowered but has knowledge. We need governments which understand and are fine-tuned to the aspirations of the people and why a particular government is popular and how they manage to get votes. Of course, there's a politics behind it, but there's also a communication which matches to the aspirations of the people that they are communicating to. And thirdly is the bureaucracy, which I think we need to break that down into creating more vertical placements, more placements coming from outside that particular steel frame and how we have been bringing them on board. I would say Minister of External Affairs with absolutely zero political background, came from Foreign Affairs. He was a spokesperson for MEA for years to come. He understands what he's doing, but of course there are questions now that he's into politics. But these are things that we can perhaps look at as ways to empower not just citizenry, but have bureaucracy which builds bridges between democracy, political parties, and the citizenry.
Faye, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry, forgive me. Same question to Mr. Roy. How much do you believe is learning on the job, and how much of a difference could we make with formal training?
Formal training is useless. See, if you just want a job in government because you want the car and you want some embassy and you want to eat pakoda somewhere and look good, then don't come to a public policy school. Then take the IAS and, and the foreign service and go and eat pakodas in the embassy in Prague. You must have the desire to do something different for the country, at least speaking from my experience. What do I want to see? Why did I come back to public service? I was in public service internationally. Not because I wanted to live in a C1 house in Delhi or something like that and, hang out in those really terrible sort of social gatherings that happen on official occasions. They're not very nice. I mean, I get bored. So I've been there where I've seen glamour. So why do you come back? You come back because, or you come into public policy because you think there is something that you want to change and you're coming to do three things about it. You're coming to find out whether you can concretize your vision of change, get people who are not thinking to adopt that, where I failed with this government, at least the second half, to adopt that as something that they want to do. And there are three ways they can do it. Electoral politics is only one of them. The second is megalomania and a sense of wanting one's own place in history. Those are interesting politicians. Those are politicians that you may take a wrong call on someone. You might think that someone is like that, they turn out to be something else. But those are politicians who can actually think beyond the calculus of electoral politics.
I'm not sure if Mr. Roy has We've lost that connection. Okay, I'll take that forward. Mr. Navtej Singh Sarna, I had a different question for you, but now I'm going to ask you if really the Foreign Service is about going to an embassy, eating pakoras in a suit and looking good.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad you came back to the question, because I would have answered that in any case. I hope Mr. Professor Roy is listening in. But, you know, I've just finished almost 38 years I did in the Foreign Service. I will not talk about the IAS, and I can't remember last when I sat there and soiling my hands eating an oily pakoda in an embassy. So in trying to build up a public policy portfolio and people, let's not make the mistake of running down what has served us very well all these years. It may not be perfect. It may need bolstering, but you can't run down the IFS and the IAS by saying that they do nothing and sit around in embassies. Certainly not the IFS that I have served for 38 years. And your foreign minister today, Mr. Dr. Jaishankar, has been in, besides several others. I think it's a highly demanding, highly sophisticated job. It's not for fools, and fools don't get in. And it's a job which requires an increasing amount of technicality. Diplomacy is not about parties. Let's get that clear. And I think our audience needs to get that clear. Diplomacy is very hard work. And everybody is not in London or Washington or Paris or Geneva. There are boys working very hard in dark Africa, in Central Asia, in the smallest of missions with virtually no assistance, difficult health conditions, difficult family conditions. They are doing a job. So I would say that if anybody wants to do public policy and sit for the IFS and the IAS and makes it, he'll be a richer entrant. He'll be somebody who will bring different skills, a different sensitivity, not necessarily better or less good than what an engineer or a doctor, and a lot of them are coming to the Indian Foreign Service today, will bring. But he will bring a different and hopefully a greater sensitivity to public issues because of his training. So the Foreign Service officers are trained before they are sent abroad. They are not just sent off like that. But what you bring with you when you enter the service is something which only you bring. So if you're a lawyer, you bring a different mindset. If you're a doctor, you bring a different mindset. If you're a public policy person, you bring a mindset. But let me say, even today, if I had to go and join the Foreign Service all over again today, I would do so without a moment's hesitation. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I would like to respond to what Mr. Sarna said. I was making a very different point, and maybe talk up the Foreign Service. They're very good Foreign Service officers. I've met lots of Foreign Service officers, especially today, who don't want to be in the Foreign Service. Just look at how the ranks have fallen. I have met a Foreign Service officer who said they didn't like living abroad in 2009 because they couldn't get into the Revenue Service. So that world has changed, Mr. Sarna. Sure, there are many good individuals in the IAS. There are many good individuals in the Foreign Service. I'm not sure about the current External Affairs Minister, but we leave that.
No, I'm not getting into personalities, but yes, the world has changed because the people the careers have changed. The availability of careers have changed. And the people who come into the Foreign Service, if they want to go into the Revenue Service, well, they shouldn't have come into the Foreign Service.
I agree, but that's how it is.
There are different imperatives.
That's my point, sir.
You can't say that something is wrong with the service or the entire field of diplomacy. So
the service and diplomacy are a function like, any other function like engineering. It exists. The question is, who is coming to do it? But I want to make a more practical point that in the current seniority-based system, if you want to be a bureaucrat, you best get in early. The earlier you get in, the better your chances of going up. On the other hand, if you want to do something interesting, then sure, a public policy career will work. But you know what? I think this is all going to change because of what other people said. For better or worse, what is happening, I think, in many countries, including our own, is a great sense of passion to be engaged and involved in the making and framing of public policy. Now, that can be bad or good. Misinformation is a very important part of the passion by which US politics was run until very recently. You can see it in our own country. You can see it in the UK. You also see good information. So working with the bureaucracy to effect change and finding people in the bureaucracy who share your vision of what change is to be effected, I think is the trick you will get in a public policy school. So if you have that passion to effect change, then a public policy school gives you three things.
Yes.
A cohort, a network of people who think like you in diverse circumstances. It gives you the strategy to build networks within government, and it gives you the ability to communicate what you want, whether it be the media or in politics or anywhere else, and thereby get to where you want. I repeat, that is very distinct from a desire to become, let's say, the chief secretary of a state, as opposed to wanting to bring zero-based natural farming to a state and therefore wanting to become chief secretary. The latter is what the public policy school equips you for.
And I will, when we speak, and I'm going to bring in right now the founders of the school, because one of the things that I did notice is that the exam for IFS has a maximum age limit of 30. So it really then limits how much time one can spend getting a formal education, in the sense of we're talking about very young people. Also the challenge of the fact that the younger you get in, the better it is, because the longer your career is before the retirement age. But before we bring in the founders of the school, if everybody does have your prospectus of the Kautilya School of Public Policy, Hyderabad, this process is also, to unveil this prospectus. So this is what it is for those who are watching and answer. And I've noticed that we've had a lot of questions coming in during this conversation. We'll try and answer as many of those questions as we can. You can check out the school on its website as well. Let me just tell you what it's Kautilya with a Y. .org.in. You do a quick search for the Kautilya School of Public Policy and you will find it. It's in Hyderabad, which personally I believe is a great place, for a school to be placed, because Hyderabad is really a gorgeous city. Coming back to our panel, and now we have the founders of the school. Mr. Shri Bharat joins us right now. Thank you for joining us. A couple of the questions that did come up, formal school versus joining the service immediately. Do you expect, is this course also designed for those people who want to take the entrance exam and join the service and be part of the steel frame? In that case, would you expect them to start really young? How would that be structured?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I do think that is an avenue that people can pursue post school, but that's not the only avenue that we are pushing for. I think the board members who've spoken before have raised a lot of interesting points, and you have to be conscious of the audience. Today, we have about 250 participants. If I had maybe a movie star, maybe I would have had 1,000 or 2,000, right? So how many people are actually coming and listening to these topics and wanting to participate is the question. And my statement to the ones listening is that it's not about numbers. It's about the individual. Even one person can change the city, the state, the country. And if you can enter with that perspective, I think the options are endless. See, just a brief background, maybe some of the members here know the participants also. So I come from a family of politicians. My mother's father is a 5-time Congress a member of parliament. My father's father is from TDP and he's a 2-time member of parliament. And I grew up with both of them on opposite sides and not meeting publicly for almost 20 years and only meeting in family events because of the politics of it. And also due to virtue of this background, also met a lot of civil servants, a lot of policy leaders. And it was very interesting for me to see the various points of arrival. And I'm an educationalist now. We lead a university that my grandfather founded. And when we go and sit with government officers who need to give us permissions, the approach is always, especially when you're private institutions, that you're all crooks, you're all doing this only for the money. And we know that all of this is just hogwash, right? And it's very hard for me to enter into that perspective and tell them otherwise. My words don't matter. And these people have reached that stage after maybe 20, 30 years of going through a system that may or may not have mutated them into a certain perspective. Our hope here, and I think what Dr. Roy and Mr. Sarna said, I agree completely, that the institutions are the ones that have got us here so far, whether it be the political or the bureaucratic. But the individuals that are going into it, what kind of individuals are going with what kind of thought process, that is very important to me. And we also want to tell everyone that this is not easy. This is not a cakewalk. This is not like going and doing a BTech and getting a cushy computer job sitting in front of a computer in an AC office, right? So this is something that you have to aspire for. This is something that you want to fight for. And what I've seen in my peers and in my social circle is a lot of people who have benefited from either their predecessors or from their circumstances believe that, okay, now I have no obligation to give back to the city or the country because I'm already good. I'll take care of myself. And if my life is not good here, I'll go off to the US or go somewhere else because the opportunities are better. But then who stays back and who fights to build a better country for the billions who don't have the access to leave the country that easily, right? And you may be in the minority. Let's just take our particular situation. We are United States in 2014, then we were split into two. And Hyderabad was the capital city for then United Andhra Pradesh. And all of the people from Andhra used to go to Hyderabad for better opportunities. Today, if the educated and the talented youth continue to believe that I don't have opportunities in Andhra and I want to go to Hyderabad or Bombay or Bangalore, then what happens to Andhra? And we want to inspire leaders from all parts of the country to come to us, get through that education, and then go back to whatever it is that drives them. If it means public service, getting into IAS or IFS, then so be it. But if it means going into politics, if it means going and getting a job, if it means going and helping somebody else write policy, the options are endless. What we want to do ultimately is create leaders, create individuals who have empathy for the other side. Because I think one of our speakers said before, this is not a zero-sum game. And we need to understand where others are coming from. And if you can speak the language of what others are saying, then you connect with them, and then better outcomes can come out of this exercise. And I think to what Dr. Roy said, when we are creating this community of 60 students, and they're coming from different backgrounds, and they all live together for 2 years from different political viewpoints, different regional perspectives, different castes, and they all understand that at the core of it, there is a lot of alignment, but there's a lot of noise that distracts us from seeing that picture. And if you can get to the core, I think we would have done a great service to the country by creating those or developing those 60 individuals.
Thank you. Mr. Prateek Kanwal is also with us. Prateek, obviously this is a brilliant idea, but coming out of the Harvard Kennedy School, what made you think that we need a version of that in India? And why do you believe that this particular endeavor with the Kautilya School of Public Policy will fill that gap?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing their views and brilliantly articulating why we need the school. I mean, when I was studying at the Kennedy School, I went way back in 2016 to the Kennedy School. And if you look at my options in India at that time, I didn't have much options. I was told MBA kar lo, right? I was like, but MBA kyun kar lo? Right? I don't want to be in the business side of it. I want to be in the social, political, public life, right? How do you get into that? And I was told that, the only way option is that you at least start off by doing an MBA, earn money, support a few politicians on the side, and then you may figure out a way to get into it. And I have been a career, development professional, right? I've worked for a decade in the nonprofit space, especially in the education sector. And somehow the fact of doing an MBA seemed like, okay, the lender of last resort. There is nothing else, do an MBA, right? But then I had mentors who told me that, why don't you look at the Kennedy School? And I was very inspired by the fact, the curriculum and the kind of faculty and the kind of research they bring in. And I was really doubly lucky that I didn't have to pay for the education because World Bank said, okay, we'll pick up the tab, right? So, and that sort of hit me somewhere, okay, that somebody's paying for my education. Like, why is World Bank paying for my education, right? Right? Kids to ensure everything was covered. Even my travel outside of the school for experience purposes was covered, right? I felt that the calling was that they feel that I need to do something. And when you're young, you don't really realize that the kind of pressure there is from outside world, because you're yourself exploring, right? But my friends constantly used to tell me, what about us? What about this, space which we want to explore, but we don't have the avenues which you have. We can't go to Kennedy. We can't go to a Princeton. We can't go to look at US. US has about 10 to 12 high quality public policy school. Kennedy is Kennedy because of the Harvard, okay? But there are other schools as well, right? Every big university runs a public policy school, right? And they're highly successful public policy school with their own corpuses, with their own relations to the governments of the states, internationally. They consult various governments. Like Israel Palestine negotiations are being done by moderated by the Harvard Kennedy School, right? That's the level at which they operate. But if you look back in India, there's chaos, right? There is absolute chaos. There's pandemonium. And when I was in 2016 in the Kennedy School, demonetization happened soon after I joined. Somebody asked me out there, okay, how did you guys frame this policy? And I couldn't answer that question. And I had Amartya Sen teaching economics to me, who was attacked by our prime minister. The Harvard versus hard work remark came in at that point. And I asked him, and he said, we've never planned for policies. We just have an iterative approach to policies. Whenever we react and we frame policies, we keep reacting to outside pressure and frame policies. And that's the opening remark you made. The farm laws are a reactive, iterative flow of policies. They will be changed now because of a reaction. But why don't we think about these things before? And that's what the Kennedy School teaches you, right? How do you have evidence? How do you have a participatory approach? How do you bring in multi-stakeholder approach towards framing the policies? And that's what excited me to come back and set up the Kautilya School of Public Policy, because I feel that a nation of 1.3 billion people need, evidence-based, participatory, multi-stakeholder approach policy making, in this country. So that's, and the fact that there is, every year I get requests, can you help me get into Kennedy School? I mean, I'm like, how? I mean, why? They take only 5-7 people and you are about 70-80 people. I run a fellowship called the Citizens for Public Leadership Fellowship, wherein we train a bunch of public policy professionals. Every year, the aspiration level to get into public policy, to go into a top public policy school is increasing. And if we can't meet that demand in India, the so-called Atmanirbharta won't come, right? The Atmanirbharta has to be, in a policy school as well. You need to have a policy school by the Indians, for the Indians, of the Indians, ready to actually take on the world and help the world sort of enter India and, be sort of this global shaper, right? You can't shape global opinions and be a global participant without having a credible public policy school in India. And that's where my motivation comes from.
Actually, really well said. I also want to bring in Prateek, Kanwal here, Prateek. So obviously, that's the challenge, but I'm going to ask you a very, very base question that a lot of people will ask when going to a college, when doing a course that is this expensive. And from the prospectus, if I'm not mistaken, not counting books and food, we're talking about 15 lakh rupees. The question I'm going to ask is, what job will I get at the end of this? Which is what the parents will ask also. So what job will the students, will your graduates get?
That's a brilliant question. I'll talk about my own career here, right? My own career started with, CRISIL ratings in the education department, right? Mm-hmm. I used to look at their, higher education quality ratings, right? Then I moved to Teach for India. Then I moved to a London-based charity called ARC. Then I worked with the erstwhile Planning Commission on the Aadhaar project, right? A lot of fellowships have opened up. The government wants to engage. The Niti Aayog wants to engage. I mean, you'll be surprised. A fellowship with Delhi government, you can earn 1.5 lakh rupees a month, right? I mean, a Chhattisgarh Good Governance Fellowship, you can earn up to 2 lakhs if you're placed in a remote town, because you get a hardship allowance as well. Haryana government has fellowships. Rajasthan government has fellowships. Maharashtra government, Priyanka is sitting here, is trying to set up its own Niti Aayog, look at, fellowships of its own, right? So there are government fellowships wherein government is asking you to operate. There is Niti Aayog which wants you to operate. There are think tanks which Navtej sir and Rathin sir mentioned about, which wants to engage fresh young talent, which is non-PhD, right? I think the overbalance of PhDs on think tank is also somewhere cutting away the grassroots experience and the development sector experience which these bring in, right? And then there are these multilaterals which are trying to hire local people, your UN food programs, your UNICEFs. They don't want to bring in foreign talent into India anymore. They want to hire local talent. Then this whole space of tech policy has come in. Facebook, Google, you know the Ankidas controversy better than I would. They're looking at public policy in a big way. Tweets are being challenged, right? There is a whole public policy department in all these big social media firms which operates. Sequoia Capital recently has gotten Shweta Rajpal Kohli to lead their public policy department, because they know if they're making any investment, any VCs making investment into India, they better be covered on the public policy front. So the gamut of jobs is huge. It's about what training. Again, can you communicate well? Can you write policy briefs well? Can you articulate the problems? Do you understand law of the land, right? Do you understand the economics of it, right? Do you understand the social issues under which this country operates, right? What are the barriers which have held the country back for 70 years? What is the historical context in which we operate? If you're able to understand this, there'll be employers for you, right? And the best part is with the Non-Profit Act coming in, right? 2% of the contributions going to the non-profit, 60,000 crores has been unlocked as, the money going into the non-profit sector. And that allows for people to have for professionals. So your pay structures in a non-profit now look at mid to senior people get anywhere between 10 to 15 lakhs. And if you're senior enough, director level, you get about 25, 30 lakh rupees to do a job, which is full of purpose. Now imagine sitting in front of a computer, as Bharat was saying, right? Or, doing a job which has purpose and still pays you 25, 30 lakhs at the age of 25, 27. Why would you not do it, right? Then there are these foreign companies which want to invest in India because they know if the human capital doesn't build, right, if the education, health, sanitation doesn't improve, they can't sell their products into India, right? So they are pumping in money for the FCRA, the much famed FCRA law. That's bringing in the money, though the government of the day tries to sort of meddle its way, but still a lot of money is coming in, right? And that's what is flourishing the entire sector. So if you ask me about jobs, there are jobs plenty. Do you have the skills is the question. And that's what this school is all about, building those skills. Dr. Roy.
If I may just add to, I think what you said, Prateek, which is spot on. What you get, and I think Prateek will vouch for this, what does Harvard Kennedy School have that the Harvard Economics Department doesn't? It has interoperability. And I'm a classic example of interoperability. I began my life as a stockbroker. I then decided to do a PhD. I then became an academic. I got bored. Academia is boring. You have to be like Amartya Sen. You have to wait till you're 75 before you're noticed. So I moved into a career in economic diplomacy with a brief stint doing what Prateek was doing in different countries in the world, which is doing development work. I then got bored of doing economic diplomacy because they kicked me into management. And then I came back. I headed a think tank. And being in a think tank gave me interoperability. I was a member of the Pay Commission. I was able to work with the FRBM committee. I was able to work on the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. And those were the attractive things I could do because my day job, I had been trained to do with very little effort. So I could pack more into my day. And now I'm heading an international think tank because I think that what is going to happen now is the very word global is going to change. So just look at the interoperability that you get. What a public policy degree will give you that, let's say, a PhD in economics, my colleagues who spend their lives as just economists, vanilla economists, don't have, is that interoperability. The excitement of working one day in corporate, one day with a political party, the next day in international affairs, and the next day perhaps with the government of India. That is not the interoperability you get as a civil servant or as a corporate tycoon or a lawyer. You're bound in those worlds. So that is what I hope this degree will also give you, interoperability.
And I'll add 2 points. I think you asked about the price tag of the degree, right? We are the only school probably which is committing 30% of the revenues towards scholarship, right? We are saying that, if you have purpose and you cannot afford to pay for this degree, you convince us on the right reasons to join, we'll pick up the tab for you. We're not shying away from saying that this public policy school is never a money minting initiative. Even Harvard Kennedy School doesn't have the corpus of a Harvard Business School, right? You have to distinguish between a business school and a school which is set up for purpose, which is set up to build the country, right? So I think that if you have the right intentions, right skill sets, right motivations, right value systems, don't worry about that, the tab. the tab comes in, I think we're trying to balance cost and quality, right? If you have to offer world-class quality of a Harvard Kennedy school, there'll be some cost attached to it, right? But we're not saying that if you can't pay for it, don't come. We're saying you come, right? If you have the merit, you come. Need will take care of it, right? And the second point is, I think the kind of network access we've all been able to build because of working and having these degrees, I think all those networks will be opened up for you. I think the knowledge, skills, and networks will be given to you, and we're going to place a premium on communication. I think public policy specialists in India and especially the government, bureaucracy, everybody needs to communicate well. I think we are a country which thinks really well but doesn't articulate it well. Right? That's where we miss out on. I think if you ask me the difference between a Harvard Kennedy school and any other school in India, it's the ability to communicate and put across a point and convince people, right? The narratives are missing. I think we'll help you create your narrative. That's what we're trying to do.
If I may just add, Faye.
Yes.
If I may just add, Faye, this point about communications in our country sometimes gets, shall I say, subsumed by everybody feeling that there are big people with big voices who should be heard. And that is not how public policy in the future is going to be shaped. I think Priyanka talked about how the citizen today is a new kind of citizen who has a weapon in her hand, which is usually the phone. And that weapon has allowed her to communicate what she feels is the impact of policy on her. So you are now talking of the need for policymakers to be able to not just articulate or write or make a GIF or a JPEG file. It's not that. It's the skill in being able to fine-tune their communication in a way that that policy can be sold better. That is what is missing. And the voices questioning it are multiplying every minute. So I just wanted to add that.
Sridhar Pabbisetty, who is actually, from what I understand, the brainchild behind this whole thing, it started with him. Sridhar, tell us the story of why you decided to do this and where the Kautilya School of Public Policy came from.
Well, I think it's been a long conversation that's happened over the last 2 years between Bharat, Prateek, and I joined in about a year ago. And I think for all of us, it's been a shared passion of trying to say that, well, why is India like this? We have so much potential, but we are not really going the right way. We are not making the right changes for us to really flourish, right? I remember about a decade and a half ago when I was a student at Stockholm School of Economics, studying development economics, I said, it's not just about the wealth where Sweden is sitting on. It's not the starting point, but it's just about how well the systems work, right? And I think I came back being very impressed, saying that if only we could change the way we govern ourselves. And I think the last 12 years of being a practicing public policy activist and practitioner has been of saying that, why are we stuck? Why are we not able to make simple changes that leapfrog us towards being a better governed nation, right? I mean, we see that struggle in every single way, right? I mean, why are the farmers agitating? And, they're stuck between devil and the deep sea. The APMC system that hardly works, but at the same time, they don't trust free markets. Now, how do you get out of these things, right? And I think I've always been fortunate enough of having amazing conversation with both politicians and bureaucrats across the board and speaking about why don't you think of solutions? And they say, Sridhar, where do we have time to look out for solutions? Why don't you tell us what we should be doing? And irrespective of how much we have kind of boiled the ocean against them, they'll always come back and say, give me the solution. And being serving on different committees, what I've realized is that we need a set of solutions to inform our decision makers, right? Look at the whole challenge of urbanization. We all know urbanization is an irreversible cycle in India. In Bangalore, for the last many years, 1,000 people have made a one-way migration to be in Bangalore. Do we have affordable low-income housing? Do we have affordable upper-income housing? No, we don't have. Why aren't we creating that? And until unless we look at plans and planned development to solve many of these challenges, we will not get over it. And that's where our conviction comes, that you need the best and the brightest to come into public policy, politics, and public service. Nation building is an ongoing activity, and India, we have to do a lot more to achieve this. And that's where we see our 60 graduates who will be graduating 2 years from now to play a pivotal role in trying to bring towards a box of solutions, work with different stakeholders. And our vision comes from there, wherein we are rebalancing the role of society, government, and business to achieve only two things. One, equitability, and second, regenerativeness. We all know that we are going a downhill slope as far as sustainability is concerned. We need a whole box of solutions to come towards that. And our students will practice that during 2 years being here, wherein they will work with thought leaders and come back and say that how do we paint a sustainable future, and not necessarily looking at business, government, and society to be at loggerheads with each other, but being partners in creating a new future, right? And creating an equitable world is an aspiration that every child has, each one of us has, just that we put on the back burner in short-term career goals. But nation building will make sure that we all raise to the occasion whenever we get a wonderful opportunity. And I want to tell the whole of India that today is the opportunity to come together and build a great nation forward. Where do you want to see your position in the future? Not of the past, not of the present, but of the future. What do you want India to change towards, and how can we leapfrog many other countries who are struggling with self-imposed problems? So there can be only self-imposed solutions that we should continuously put forward and change. Faye, it's even at the peak of our agitations in Bengaluru, so many bureaucrats would call in and say that, okay, now smarty pants, you have put 20 problems that you have with our solution. What solution do you have? And trust me, every time we have said put public transport ahead of private transport, we have won. Every time we have put off saying that protect the environment and make our lakes sustainable and beautiful, we have won over the polluting industries. We have won over files that have never been looked into, right? The same Bellandur Lake report was written in 2015, 2016. It became a government document in 2017. Only when the fires happened, NGT said, what are the ideas? And the same report was what is giving direction to how Bellandur Lake can be saved and how other lakes can be saved. So I would say that, there are a million solutions to be written. Come together and join this journey. And we are excited and delighted to have the wisdom of so many people. You've heard Rathin, Dilip, Priyanka, and Navtej coming and passionately saying that, what is the next 10 years going to be, and what is the role that each one of us can play. And that's what Kautilya School of Public Policy is all about.
Thank you. I want to quickly now take questions that we've got from our audience. We've got a bunch of questions. Some of you have given us your name, some of you haven't. To the panel, please feel free to jump in if you want to answer the question instead of waiting for me to bring it to you, whatever you find exciting. Let me try and work through as many questions as we can. Yash Singh Sisodia says, in the next 10 years, how is India supposed to create a balance between climate change mitigation, high energy needs, rapid urbanization, while the economy is already in its worst possible place, maintaining proper foreign relations? So Yash, you seem to have asked all the questions in one, but I'm just going to pick one part of that question, which is obviously mitigating climate change and balancing it with our needs of growth is going to be a massive challenge for India. Anyone who wants to take that question, I can see you all, so just let me know. Priyanka Chaturvedi, was that you raising your hand?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to take this question simply because Maharashtra is working in that direction, and I think it is giving the direction to the nation that we can aspire to have sustainable development goals. We can have sustainable development, not at the expense of the environment, but coexisting with our environment. And thankfully, we have a very young environment minister who is sensitive to that cause. Right now, we've brought the Mumbai city to one of the C40 signatories, cities globally who are conscious about climate change action and affirmative action towards that. We are also, the country saw, in fact, the world wrote about it, how we moved the RA car shed to save the environment and added 800 acres of forest land in a prime city like Mumbai. So this entire argument of development at the expense of environment is now something that is being debated globally. But what keeps us away from actually coexisting is something that has to do with political willingness and wanting to take positive action so that it also creates a long-term impact. Many people will question why the environment was kept over the metro development or the car shed, but many people in times to come will note this particular action in history for a very positive environmental action that has happened. So I believe that this is something every political party should be talking about. It should be part of every political party's manifesto, policies that are created around sustainable development. And only when there is a political willingness will you see policies that are being shaped on the basis of climate mitigation. So this is something that I'm also very passionate about, and I would want to see more and more people within the country, within the states also, state governments also, I'm noticing, are more open to having fellowships, internships, taking policy ideas from experts who matter. There's no contempt for intellectuals here, while central government does see contempt for intellectuals. And it's not just a political party per se, across national political parties, they've had a contempt for intellectual discourse. So most regional parties are doing that. And I hope to see more affirmative action coming from various states as well as the center.
Thank you, Ms. Chaturvedi. We have another question from Soumya.
Who
says, why is the government not bothering?
If I may add in here. Right?
Yes, go ahead.
So, I mean,
go ahead.
The previous Karnataka government had 200 crores for a steel flyover. And every time we come back and ask, why don't you give us triple the number of buses? We have 6,000 creaky buses. If you were only having 18,000 buses, then Bengaluru will not having more cars and two-wheelers than the number of people it has. We are already at 75 lakh odd number of vehicles as we have 1.3 crore people, right? So, I mean, tripling the buses would actually decongest the city like magic overnight, right? But we are not making those investments. And I think those are the kind of trajectory shifts that are required for climate change solutions, right?
Right, absolutely. Sorry, going back to the question from Soumya, why is our government not bothering about issues about women? Day by day, they're increasing and our leaders are not looking at them. Who is going to take action? So issues, I'm assuming, safety for women, health, and things like that. Anyone on the panel who wants to jump in and address that point?
I'd want to, but as a woman, I'd be more encouraged if men speak about it.
I know. I didn't want to do that thing where we take the question on women.
I can talk about from the education perspective, since I work with Educate Girls, which is one of the largest nonprofits working on women education and getting girls to school. I think the biggest challenge, if anyone would ask me, what is holding back girls and why there is a high dropout rate at grade 8th, because a lot of the girls till 8th class go to school, but after grade, I think it's the question of menstrual hygiene. Most of the schools in rural areas, especially in the hinterland, are one teacher school, which are, male driven only school, right? Now imagine the plight of a girl who has to, balance menstrual hygiene with no toilet or one toilet or badly managed toilet with nobody to speak to in the school because there's a male teacher leading the school. Why would that system, it's system discouraging girls from going to school beyond a point, right? I think. And look at the fact that while we've been able to give schools at 1 kilometer radius for the juniors, we've not been at the senior school, secondary school, and colleges are far away from their villages. And which parent in their right mind would allow girls to go barefoot or travel on a cycle without any transport facilities? They would not be able to go to. So there is a big challenge of not being able to connect girls to the school, colleges. Last mile delivery failure in terms of transportation is a big hindrance. Big challenge comes in because they don't have people to talk to. A lot of the girls in India in the villages do not have access to the Twitter, Facebook, Instagram to understand menstrual hygiene or understand the fact that their bodies are going to evolve. They need some counselors to talk to. We've not been able to provide counselors at the village level, at the panchayat level. Our panchayats are not geared up to provide this information. There's a Panchayati Raj system, governance system which runs. But if you talk to a panchayat, it's not geared up or evolved enough to talk about these issues of health, safety, security of the women. And I think that's where we need to train these panchayats. We need to, build capacity of these panchayats to actually look at, all the girls in the village, all the women in the village. India still lives in those villages. I think the information asymmetry barriers at the urban level can still be tackled with all these modern means of communication. But you still need human capital, human power capacity at the base level, last mile delivery failure level to actually control for these challenges. So my solution would be train, a lot of these panchayats, block officers, district magistrates and district teams to actually take care of it, because that's where the real challenge lies. Dr. Roy, you were saying something.
Yes, Dr. Roy?
No, very briefly, I want to say that, this is very good. And I think I completely agree with what Prateek is saying, but it's not going to be enough until we do something in our own families and social groups, which I do when anybody in my social groups, forget my Twitter, my own family, starts saying communal things or justifies action against love jihad, which I think is contemptible. Because that is the most sexist thing you can do. And so we need to start calling it out. And need to start calling it out in our workplace, in our homes, in our societies. We don't do that because we are not acculturated, and this is a bad thing about India, to push back against people who are older than us. Now, the younger people have made it a joke and they call it the uncle phenomenon. Yeah, and that is a good thing. But we will have to start taking action here at the individual level consciously in different workplaces, in different environments, actively push back against stereotypes about commenting on how people dress, commenting on how women, look at you, understanding that when a man says something to you as a form of correction, I've just been reading about this in England, in the workplace, that is taken for granted. When a woman does it, it happens to the woman boss. Unless you're really strong like Mayawati or Jayalalitha, it's no coincidence that all the women, I'm not saying this about you, Priyanka, who have succeeded in Indian politics, have done so by terrifying the men around them. BJP has never had that privilege. That's why it's never had a strong woman lead. If you look at Indira Gandhi, look at Jayalalitha, you look at Mayawati, you look at Mamta ji, they terrify the men around them. And that is slash and burn, and that's not a good thing, but they do that because otherwise, if you do not dominate, you are vanquished. So this is the kind of thing we'll also try and talk to you about in the public policy school. I think it's a very, very important problem, but public policy goes beyond government and beyond technocracy. Sometimes it enters your own home. And that is where we have to be self-aware and learn how to be self-aware connected.
Dr. Roy, I can vouch for the fact that the need to terrify men is not specifically, only for politics. It happens in all fields of work in which women are leaders. Okay, we have Simran Parekh, who has a question about how does she navigate her path going forward. I think this is interesting. She said, I recently graduated from NYU with a master's in public policy. I have 2 years experience in the field of policy analysis and communications, including an internship with the United Nations. But due to COVID, I lost my job at the UN. How do I navigate my path forward here in India? Anyone?
What I would like to say is that, jobs in public policy is an ongoing conversation that we need to have more and more in India. On 16th of this month, we at Kautilya are hosting with Professor Rajiv Gowda, who was the chairperson of Center for Public Policy at IIM Bangalore, and Miss Catherine Stacey, who's been a career strategist at Max Bell School of Public Policy in Montreal, Canada. We are going to dwell a lot more time onto it. So I would request all those people interested in careers to join us for a longer answer there. But a short answer is this. I think in India, you will have to establish thought leadership where people would want to listen to you for solutions. And being just out of NYU for a couple of years, I would urge you to come and work with think tanks like Professor Rathin Roy's, or come work with us at Kautilya, where you would hone your skills on taking problems that are close to your heart and move the ball towards solution where business, government, and society can benefit from your unique vantage viewpoint and say, okay, how can we benefit from working together? As I said, move towards a place in the future of each sector that you are interested and come back with the best of the solutions that will work for India, right? If you can keep your eye on what will work for India and how can we move 100 miles from where we are today, we will definitely have jobs that are running behind you rather than you running behind jobs.
I have a slightly practical take on this, Faye. My suggestion to you would be, your value will be far greater in 5 years' time if you spend time in rural India, if you spend time in tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 cities in India and get the experience. A lot of the non-profits, international organizations like Facebook, Google are willing to penetrate into tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 cities, right? The urban is a cluttered field. Urban metros are a very cluttered field, right? So I would urge you pick up a job in a place like Indore or a Bhopal, understand the aspirations of the people which exist in these parts of the country, and they really want to grow, right? They need solutions. Indore is today the cleanest city in India. Why? Because successively 3 district magistrates, along with the police, along with the municipal corporation, came together and said, in 5 years' time, we're going to make Indore the cleanest place, right? Now, why is Indore the cleanest? Why is Bombay, Delhi, Chennai, which has so much taxes coming in, why is it not the cleanest place or the safest place, right? So you've got to understand the aspirations of the people, how they drive policy making. And if you spend that time in a place like Bhopal, Indore, Lucknow, Kanpur, and pick up a job with a non-profit there and help them scale, build up, your value in 5 years is going to be far greater than anybody else. I would say NYU degree plus experience of working at the grassroots level for 5 years is going to cut ice.
We have a question, and I want to, if I may take this question to Navtej ji. The question is, as bureaucrats, one is expected to handle very delicate issues at times against individual conscience of a person or against the, the politics. At a situation where the bureaucrat is likely to have different opinions from the politician they're working with, how do you cope?
Well, that's a question which every bureaucrat or every thinking bureaucrat faces at more than one occasion in his life. And there are ways of handling it, and it depends upon how strongly you feel about these. You have to understand, firstly, that if you've joined the government bureaucracy, then you're committed to government bureaucracy. You're not necessarily committed to a political party. You're committed to the Constitution of India. Your letter of appointment is in the name of the President of India and not of any political leader otherwise. So you owe your duty to the Constitution of India. How you effect that duty in practice is within your given conduct rules. There are ways of showing dissent, and it all depends upon how bosses are willing to listen to dissent. Usually, contrary to public opinion, a large amount of dissent can go on unless you start self-censoring yourself, which is also a common weakness. People start anticipating what their boss will like and therefore take the same line. I think that is something which particularly young officers, young entrants into bureaucratic service, I would like you to keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to do. And if things get really extreme and you have a conflict situation with your political bosses and you just can't take it anymore, then you have to be prepared to get out. So I think that is the ultimate test of your commitment and conscience, that how willing are you to bend and how much are you willing to bend? And can you survive by squaring your conscience with expression of your dissent within the confines of your service? It's not easy. It gets more and more difficult as you go more and more senior and otherwise there's always somebody upstairs to protect you. But when you become a secretary or a chief secretary or an ambassador, then obviously you are dealing straight with the political leadership, and that's where the potential of conflict can be more. But let me say that mostly, and unless there is a situation where somebody is making money or somebody is involved in some particular situation, mostly I think people listen to your professional advice if it is reasoned enough and it is good enough. Of course, there will be some situations when people are too committed the other side and you don't have a choice. So every person ultimately has to sort this out with his own conscience.
So quick question, Mr. Sarna. You obviously work with many politicians in all of the various, in your many years in service. is it, what is it like? Because we don't hear enough about this in the public space in India. Every time a politician, every time the minister changes, are there idiosyncrasies that come in? Do they come in and shuffle things up, change things up? Do you have to figure out what the person likes? Give us some examples of what that's like.
Well, it again depends upon what particular aspect of government you are in. But talking of the foreign affairs, which is largely a very sort of a professional domain, and even ministers who come by, they'll normally let the officers do their job, because unless we do have a lot of sometimes you do get ministers who've had a lot experience of bureaucracy in the past. So they can be pretty professional about it. I can give you a personal example that I was the Foreign Office spokesman under Prime Minister Vajpayee. And for 2 years, I was the spokesman of the Foreign Ministry when Prime Minister Vajpayee was there, and we worked very closely with the PMO of the day. And I was actually, in many ways, became the spokesman of the PMO, because they would just pass on whatever they wanted to say to us, and the Ministry and PMO worked very close together. And I anticipated then that when Mr. Vajpayee's government lost in 2004 and Dr. Manmohan Singh's government came in, I was pretty much, people around, particularly in your community of the media, whom I used to sit with and spend all my days with, they felt that, okay, he's a goner now, because, he's been a sort of spokesman for, and nobody ever in the next government ever asked me or told me that, we think now you should be moving on to become Joint Secretary East and South Africa. But, they just let me carry on. And one carried on like that. And I actually dealt with three ministers, with 2 prime ministers and 3 ministers, Mr. Yashwant Sinha, and followed by Mr. Natwar Singh, and followed by Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. And all of them retained me as a spokesman. So ultimately, I think it is when they see that you are you're not a partisan person, you're doing your job, you're a professional, they let you be. There will be small idiosyncrasies, or I shouldn't call it idiosyncrasies. There will be personal desires, some people like to, for instance, in that particular job, some people would like to meet media, people would like to keep media at a distance. Some people had a lot of personal friends among the media. So, you have to adjust that much. After all, they are your political bosses, and they are the leaders. And, so personal aspects always come in. There's no question of, there is no uniformity about this, because politicians, as Priyanka will agree, there are also human beings.
Sure. Adjustments come from both sides. So.
Politicians are human beings. Saikat Kar asked us a question. I wonder if Mr. Cherian would take this up. He says, my question for the panel is this: if a ruling government has an absolute majority, however good or bad a bill is, no rebuttal is listened to. We've seen in the last few years bills being passed with brute force. What solution do we have for that?
A very simple solution, actually. Governments, even when they are in majority, must recognize that the moment they are in government, they are expected to make legislation which applies equally for everybody. That's the fundamental expectation of government. And I'm not echoing what Biden said as soon as he was elected. The second thing is that identity politics of the kind we are experiencing is fragmenting us so fast that unless policy plays also to the same thing that politicians and other social leaders ought to do, which is play its role in unifying, therefore policy making is getting more complex. There are many who will argue that good policy making is impossible when you have heightened identity politics. That just makes the challenge for those who attend any school like Kautilya much more fun, more intriguing, and makes you intrinsically more valuable. So being in majority and in government does not mean that you don't have to make policy which actually is equally applicable across everybody, and make it communicated in such a way that everybody else also has buy-in on what you're doing based on what you're reading of your so-called majority is about.
Faye, can I?
Chaturvedi? Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to talk about this. So, those who come with majority in the parliament, they need to understand they will always have a bigger responsibility to uphold the democratic values of this country. We must also understand and give a sense of respect to the opposition that when they come with a point of view, they are also elected representatives representing the constituency they're coming from, and they are the voices of those constituencies that has elected them. And in that belief that they will raise their voices in the parliament for them. Parliamentary standing committees have become redundant. This entire feeling of opposition does not know its business is a very unfortunate, disrespectful way of looking at democracy. Not the opposition, the democracy, and having absolute contempt for democratic values of this nation. This nation did not understand democracy only from 1947 onwards. Please understand our values, core values have been that of democracy. When we call ourselves the argumentative Indians, this is what it stood for, that we debate, we dissent, we disagree, but we find a consensus. That is what is missing. I remember Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee's era where he would try and arrive at a consensus. He also had some very important intellectuals who would contribute to policy making and to contribute to governance. He would set aside some people in his cabinet, but would give more prominence to those who were experts in their fields. The economy did well under him. Unfortunately, he could not communicate that, or he communicated that in a very overconfident manner. And that is why people did not support the government to return back. So this is what you need to understand. When you come in majority, you need to have more responsibility to maintain the ethos of parliamentary democracy. That is what is lacking. And I was witness, it was my first session. I was witness to how the bill was passed into an act, the farmer bills were passed into an act, where no time was allotted to political parties, especially the opposition voices, to be able to even make their point of view heard. So this is how it has been happening in the parliament. And for a first-time parliamentarian, it was, in my first session, it was extremely upsetting to watch how all norms were broken to push through a legislation which they believe will work best for the nation. But and total disregard for the federal structure and understanding that every state has a different stake in this entire farm bill.
Absolutely. I have one quick question also that's come in from someone who says that, again, the cutoff is 30 years. And so for someone who's passed to enter the service, so for someone who's past the age of 30, what are the opportunities really to get involved and get a job in public policy? Anyone wants to take that question?
Well, it depends on what you did before you were 30. But let me assume that you're making a clear career break at the age of 30, and let's say you're coming in from, a life in the private sector, corporate sector, and you want to come to public policy. Then you have to ask, I think, the question that Prateek asked, tried to answer earlier. Why do you want to come into public policy? That should guide you about what you want to do next. And then perhaps you want to ask yourself, do I need to be equipped better to address why I want to come into public policy? Let's say that you want to improve. You want to come into public policy because you're deeply disturbed. I'm too old now, that children in this country are being taught but not educated. They're attending school, they're being taught, and I think that has a lot to do with the gender issue, the caste issue, and many other things. Because the entire education is coming from a terribly, terribly retrograde place. Now you feel like this and say, I was 30. I would say, well, what do I need to do to understand this better? Well, I'd go out and talk to the communities and find people who are able to answer these questions for me. I would then find a location where I could go and learn more about how to do these things, perhaps work with people like Prateek on a fairly technocratic premise, and then perhaps come to Kautilya to be able to equip yourself, knowing what your direction is, to go forward. Age is no bar anymore. In fact, 30 in this country is young. This country is run by a gerontocracy. Remember that, okay? When I first came to this country, I was in my mid-40s. I was called young man. I think of myself as a young man in the mid-40s. It's a gerontocratic place, public policy. So 30 is young. There are many things you can do. You may not be able to take the civil service, which is not public policy. It's one form of public policy. But there are many, many other things you can do. You can contribute to the defense and security of India without joining the police or the army. Similarly, you can contribute to public policy, but you must know what you want to contribute to, and why you want to make the switch. That reflection at this time, immediately for you, sir, is, or ma'am, I don't know, is essential.
Yes, that was good, Mayor. So, ma'am, yes. I'm going to draw this to a close right now because you've all been extremely patient and very candid with your answers. Thank you so much for, answering all of those questions and giving us so much of your time. To our audience who are watching, of course, this is literally the beginning. This was a launch panel discussion. The school now begins. And like I said, you can take a look at the information that's available on the website. You can get in touch with the school if you have more questions. I noticed a lot of the questions that came in were about career prospects after doing the course, what those placements would be like, what those connections would be like. So really, those are questions best asked to the school directly and to the founders directly. Dr. Roy, go ahead, yes.
Sorry, there was a question, if the panel will indulge me, I noticed in chat from a person with disabilities, asking whether that would enable them to join, disable them from joining the civil service. So I just want to make it very clear to you that absolutely not. In fact, the government of India has one of the most progressive policies with respect to differently abled people. There is even a small reservation. And I can say from firsthand experience, at least of the IAS at the field level, that people who are differently abled have performed splendidly as district magistrates, as subdivisional magistrates, as field officers. So you will have a full and rich career in government. If you choose to go in for it, please cast this apprehension out.
Yeah,
yes.
And if I can add to what Dr. Roy just said, even in the Foreign Service, we have taken now the first 100% visually impaired lady diplomat. She is in the service, and I think her interviews are on YouTube, etc. I think I saw something. So that I absolutely agree with that. There is no bar to that.
Absolutely. Also, for our audience who are still asking questions about careers after this particular course, there is a specific webinar just for you. It will be on Wednesday, the 16th of December at 7 p.m. You can go to the Kautilya School of Public Policy website and register for that webinar as well. Please do. And that's an entire webinar dedicated to the career opportunities in public policy. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us, our audience and our panel. Good luck to the founders and to the school and the faculty. I'm sure you're going to make a big difference to the country in the future.